Your Majesty, if you mean to marry me without loving me, I would rather know it before the vows." The woman standing before my council table did not tremble when she said it. That was the first thing I remember clearly. Not the rain striking the western windows, not the silver map spread beneath my hands, not the 12 nobles who had spent the afternoon speaking about her as though she were a bridge, a granary, or a strip of disputed land. I remember her eyes. Hazel, steady, and far too calm for a woman whose future had just been negotiated by men twice her age. I had been Alpha King of Greyhaven for 11 years. I had signed treaties in rooms where assassins waited behind curtains. I had ordered armies home when victory would have been easier than mercy. I had buried my father, 2 brothers, and enough soldiers to know that crowns were mostly made of promises no sane man would willingly wear. But I had never been asked so plainly whether I intended to love my own wife. Around us, the council went silent. Lady Sabine Arlo stood beside the empty chair reserved for the southern delegation. She wore a dark green traveling dress with rain still shining along the hem. No jewels, no elaborate braid, only a narrow leather cord at her throat and a small silver key hanging from it. She had arrived 2 hours earlier after riding through a storm because the bridge at Foxmere had washed out. Her uncle had apologized for her appearance. She had not. I looked at him now. Lord Arlo had the expression of a man who wanted the floor to open beneath his niece. "Sabine," he said under his breath. She did not look away from me. I should have given the diplomatic answer, something measured, something a king could say and a treaty could survive. Instead, I told her the truth. "I do not know you well enough to love you." One of my ministers inhaled sharply. Sabine nodded once. "Good." That startled me more than accusation would have. "Good," I repeated. "I would have distrusted you if you had lied." A few men shifted in their seats. I almost smiled. The match had been proposed because Greyhaven needed access to the southern grain roads, and House Arlo needed military protection along the marsh border. That was the neat version written on parchment. The untidy truth was that both sides were tired of burying farmers whenever raiders crossed the reeds, and marriage was cheaper than another season of blood. I had agreed because duty had demanded it. Sabine had agreed, according to her uncle, because she understood duty. Until that moment, I had not considered whether she understood it too well. I closed the map beneath my palm. "What do you expect from this marriage?" I asked. Her uncle began. "Your Majesty, my niece is prepared to." I asked her. He stopped. Sabine's expression changed by barely a breath, but I saw it. Relief, not gratitude. Relief that someone had remembered she possessed a voice. "I expect honesty," she said. "A room with a lock I control, work worth doing, no public humiliation if affection does not come, and the freedom to leave a conversation when everyone starts discussing me as though I am not in it." The youngest counselor coughed into his hand. This time I did smile. "Reasonable." "I thought so. And what do you offer in return?" Her gaze sharpened. "Honesty, loyalty if I am treated with loyalty, work, and no public humiliation if you discover I snore." Lord Arlo shut his eyes. My wolf, who had been restless all afternoon, settled for the first time that day. Not with recognition. Not yet. There was no thunder inside me, no blazing mark, no sacred voice whispering mate. Only a strange quiet, as if some door deep in the house of my mind had stopped rattling in the wind. I told myself it meant nothing. "Then we understand each other," I said. "Almost." Of course there was more. Sabine reached into the pocket of her dress and placed a folded paper on the table. Her uncle went pale. I did not touch it. "What is that?" "My condition." Lord Arlo rose. "This is unnecessary." She turned to him. "You promised I could speak for myself." "I promised you would be heard." There is a difference. I knew then that whatever negotiations had taken place before she reached my court, she had not been invited into most of them. I opened the paper. It contained only 4 lines. The villages along the marsh would be placed under joint protection. Grain levies would not rise for 3 years. Widows of border guards would retain their homes. Any future child of our marriage would inherit only after both territories formally accepted the union. No jewels, no allowance, no title beyond what marriage already gave her. You ask nothing for yourself, I said. I asked for a luck. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The council stared. Sabine's mouth curved at one corner. That was how our marriage began. Not with destiny, but with a lock, 3 years of stable grain levies, and a room full of men discovering that the quiet woman they had underestimated kept better terms than they did. We married 12 days later. There was no grand moon festival. I refused the council's request for one because half the southern roads were still flooded, and Sabine said she would rather spend the money repairing the river embankment than feeding nobles who already owned kitchens. The ceremony took place in the old stone chapel inside Greyhaven Keep. My mother's ring rested in a cedar box beside the vows. I had not opened that box in 9 years. My mother, Queen Mareth, had worn the ring until the winter fever took her. It was plain by royal standards, a band of pale moon silver set with a small piece of river pearl. Father had once told me it belonged to the first queen who chose Greyhaven's founder after refusing 3 wealthier kings. The story had become one of those soft legends old nurses told children. The ring was said to warm when given in true devotion. I did not believe it. My father had believed enough for both of us. Before the ceremony, I carried the cedar box to Sabine's chamber myself. She opened the door wearing a simple ivory gown, her hair half-pinned, while 2 attendants argued over ribbons behind her. When she saw the box, all humor left her face. That was your mother, S. I stopped. How did you know? Everyone in Greyhaven knows. I glanced at the attendants. They found urgent reasons to leave. Sabine stepped back and let me enter. I do not have to give it to you, I said. The jeweler made another band. She studied me. Do you want me to wear hers? The question landed strangely. I had expected pride, perhaps all. Instead, she wanted to know whether the gift cost me something. I don't know, I admitted. She looked down at the cedar box. Then keep it today. I frowned. It is customary. So is pretending marriages like ours are romantic. I laughed softly despite myself. She lifted her eyes. If one day you want me to have it because you cannot imagine it belonging anywhere else, give it to me then. Until that day, let your mother remain yours. No woman had ever returned a royal jewel before receiving it. No courtier would have dared. I should have been offended. Instead, the quiet door inside me opened another inch. At the altar, I placed the new silver band on her finger. She placed one on mine. Our vows were simple. Respect, honesty, protection, choice. No declarations we did not feel. When the priest asked whether I accepted Sabine Arlo freely, she looked directly at me. Not submissively, not fearfully, waiting. I said yes. When he asked her, she breathed once before answering. Yes. Only then did the chapel wolves move. 4 royal guardians had been lying along the rear wall, old gray animals trained to remain still during ceremony. At Sabine's answer, all 4 lifted their heads at once. One stood. Then another. The priest faltered. The largest wolf, Ash, walked the length of the chapel and stopped beside Sabine. I felt every noble in the room lean forward. Ash had belonged to my father. He disliked strangers. He tolerated ministers and ignored visiting dignitaries. Yet he lowered his great head and pressed it against Sabine's open hand. Her eyes widened. A warmth moved across my ribs. Not fire, not pain. Recognition, perhaps, but unfinished. Sabine stroked Ash once behind the ear. "He has terrible timing," she whispered. "I've heard her." "So do you," I murmured. Her smile nearly ruined my solemn expression. The court noticed the wolves. Of course they did. By supper, whispers had spread through the keep that the old guardians had accepted the southern bride. I dismissed it as instinct. Sabine dismissed it as coincidence. Ash dismissed both our opinions and began sleeping outside her chamber. The first weeks of marriage were not romantic. They were practical. Sabine attended morning council because I had promised her work. On the third day, she discovered that our grain ledgers counted spoiled stores as available reserve. On the fifth, she asked why soldiers, widows had to petition each winter to keep cottages already granted to them. On the seventh, she offended 3 wealthy merchants by asking why river tolls doubled only when southern farmers arrived. I had never enjoyed counsel so much. She did not argue loudly. That was what made her dangerous. Sabine would listen until everyone else had exhausted himself, then ask one question no one wanted to answer. Who benefits? Who signed this? Why is this number different? Did anyone ask the people living there? Men who could survive battlefields began avoiding her gaze over breakfast. At night we lived in adjoining rooms, as agreed. The door between them remained unlocked but closed. On our 10th evening, I found a tray outside my study containing bread, cheese, sliced pear, and a note. "You missed supper. Kings apparently need feeding too." No signature. I knew her handwriting. The next morning I sent tea to her workroom with a note of my own. Queens apparently forget breakfast when arguing with tax records. She returned the cup with another note. "A dangerous rumor. Suppress it immediately." We began speaking in notes, because neither of us was brave enough to name what those small acts were becoming. A month passed. Then 2. The southern grain roads reopened. Border raids decreased. Sabine reorganized the widow petitions so thoroughly that my chancellor complained she had removed an entire category of administrative fees. "Good," she said. He appealed to me. I looked at the revised figures. "She is right." He stopped appealing. The court slowly learned that my wife was not decorative. Her own family learned it more slowly. Her uncle returned in early autumn for the Harvest Council. He arrived with 30 riders, 3 wagons of gifts, and the assumption that Sabine would sit silently beside him while he negotiated new transport rights. She did not. During the second session, Lord Arlo referred to her proposal as a charming domestic concern. I saw Sabine's fingers still on the table. "What concern?" I asked. He smiled at me. "Her wish to reduce the ferry levy on widowed farmers. Admirable compassion, of course, though trade policy requires broader experience." Sabine opened her mouth. I raised a hand, not to silence her, but to stop myself from speaking too quickly. "Lord Arlo," I said, "who designed the current southern ferry schedule." He hesitated. "My steward with council approval." "And who found that it charges small carts more per sack than merchant barges." His eyes shifted toward Sabine. "Your queen," I said. The title changed the room. "Not my bride, not your niece. Your queen." Sabine looked at me. I continued. "If her concern is domestic, then apparently my kingdom is a very large household." No one laughed. Lord Arlo bowed his head. "As you say, Your Majesty." After council, Sabine caught up with me in the East Corridor. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." No, you could have let me answer him. I stopped. She was not angry exactly, but I had mistaken defense for permission. You're right, I said. That surprised her. I had surprised myself. I should have let you finish, I added. I was angry. At him. Yes. Why? Because he had reduced her to something small. Because he had spoken of her as though she were still the girl he could place wherever politics required. Because every part of me had wanted to stand between her and the insult. But protection could become another kind of cage if I was not careful. Because he was wrong, I said. Sabine studied me for a moment. Then she nodded. Next time, let me be wronged in my own voice first. I almost laughed. That is a difficult request. I married a king. I assumed difficulty. She walked away. Ash followed her. I stood in the corridor watching both of them go and understood, with growing unease, that my practical marriage was becoming the least practical thing in my life. The first person to tell me I was in love with my wife was my sister. Myrle had the tact of a thrown boot. She came to Greyhaven 3 days before the autumn hunt, found me in the armory pretending to inspect a set of ceremonial spearheads, and leaned against the door. You know those were polished yesterday. I am aware. You have been staring at the same spear for 5 minutes. I am thinking. About Sabine. I set the spear down. Myrle grinned. Leave. No. I am still king. And I am still the only person in this castle who remembers you at 14, crying because a goose chased you into a pond. I pointed at the door. She folded her arms. You watch Sabine when she is not looking. I watch everyone. Not like that. I had commanded cavalry charges with less discomfort. Myrle's expression softened. You are allowed to care for her. That is not the problem. What is? I looked toward the narrow armory window. Across the inner courtyard, Sabine was speaking with 2 stable hands beside a wagon wheel. Her sleeves were rolled above her wrists. She had discovered the wheelwright was charging the crown twice for imported iron that actually came from a local forge. She looked entirely at home among grease, ledgers, and irritated workmen. The marriage began as an agreement, I said. I will not turn affection into another obligation she has to fulfill. Myrle was quiet. She chose the marriage, she said. She chose peace for her people. And you? The same. My sister followed my gaze. Then perhaps both of you should be allowed to choose again. The words stayed with me. That evening, Sabine and I attended the harvest feast in the lower hall. It was the first large celebration since our wedding. Musicians crowded the gallery. The tables smelled of roasted apples, rosemary, hot bread, and cider. Soldiers sat beside farmers. Merchants argued with shepherds. Greyhaven did not divide feast days by rank unless foreign envoys were present. Sabine loved that. I had learned the signs, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she forgot to arrange her face into court composure. She laughed more easily among people who did not care whether her spoon was held correctly. Halfway through supper, an old baker named Mistress Fenn caught Sabine by the wrist and pulled her into a circle dance. Sabine looked at me across the room with the expression of a condemned prisoner. I lifted my cup in salute. Coward, she mouthed. Then she danced. Poorly. Gloriously. Sabine knew the steps but not the rhythm. She turned left when everyone turned right, collided with a cooper, apologized while laughing, and lost one of her hairpins. By the second song, half the hall had joined simply because the Queen's complete lack of grace made everyone else feel talented. I had never seen a court become hers so quickly. Then Lord Varick arrived. He was alpha of the Eastern Ridge, unmarried, wealthy, and much too aware of both facts. He had come late from a patrol and entered still wearing his riding coat. I respected him as a commander. I disliked him as a conversational habit. Varric watched Sabine dance for perhaps 30 seconds before walking directly into the circle. Myrl, seated beside me, made a small sound. "Do not," I said. "I said nothing. You made a sound." I breathed. Maliciously. Across the hall, Varric bowed to Sabine and offered his hand. She accepted. Something unpleasant happened behind my ribs. It was not rage. It was worse because it was ridiculous. Jealousy. I had no claim to it. Sabine was my wife by treaty, yes, but our private agreement had left room for honesty. I had offered no love. I had not asked for hers. She was dancing in a public hall with a trusted ally, surrounded by hundreds of people. There was nothing improper in it. I hated every second. Varric was an excellent dancer. That made it worse. He guided her easily through the turns. Sabine laughed when he rescued her from another wrong step. He said something near her ear. She answered. He laughed. My wolf paced once inside me. Myrl reached for an apple. Interesting. Say one more word, and I will exile you to the northern monastery. They make excellent honey. I know. You sent them 6 new hives last spring. I turned my cup between my fingers. The song ended. Varric bowed over Sabine's hand. I stood. Myrl choked on her apple. I ignored her and crossed the hall. Sabine saw me coming. Her eyebrows rose. Varric straightened. Your Majesty. Varric. A fine feast. So I'm told. Sabine's mouth twitched. I offered her my hand. Dance with me. She looked at my palm, then at my face. You hate dancing. I have reconsidered. Varric was wise enough to disappear. Sabine placed her hand in mine. The moment our skin touched, the hall altered. Not visibly at first. I felt warmth pour through my palm, swift and bright, running up my arm like sunlight through cold water. Sabine inhaled. Her fingers tightened around mine. The music continued, but the sound seemed to move farther away. Did you feel that? I asked. Yes. The word was barely audible. A pale line of silver appeared beneath the skin, at the base of her thumb. My heart stopped. Then an answering line appeared on mine. Not a full mate mark, a single curved thread thin as a hair. Sabine stared at it. Around us, no one had noticed yet. I closed my hand gently around hers. Do you want to leave? Her eyes lifted to mine. That was the question that mattered. Not what the mark meant, not what the court would say, not whether Greyhaven's oldest songs would call this fate. Did she want to leave? Sabine swallowed. No. So we danced. I was better than she was, though not by much. My mother had insisted I learn. Sabine stepped on my boot twice. Your Majesty, she murmured after the second offense, I regret to report an attack on the crown. By a southern agent. Clearly. Should I summon the guard? Only if they can dance. I laughed. The silver line under my skin warmed again. Sabine stopped smiling. We both knew then that it had not been imagination. At the edge of the hall, Ash stood from beside the hearth. One by one, the other royal wolves rose with him. No one bowed. No mystical light filled the rafters. The moon did not split the clouds. The wolves simply watched us. And I understood that whatever had begun in the chapel had moved one step closer. After the feast, Sabine came to my study. She did not knock timidly. She entered, shut the door, and held out her hand. The silver curve remained. So, she said, that is inconvenient. I stared at her. She stared back. Then I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Sabine tried to remain serious for perhaps 5 seconds before joining me. When the laughter faded, the room felt quieter than before. She sat across from me. My grandmother had a mark like this, she said. Was she bonded? Yes, eventually. Eventually. Sabine traced the curve with one finger. In the South, unfinished marks are called listening marks. They appear when two wolves or two people with wolf blood recognize possibility. They do not complete unless both choose the bond. I had heard older versions of the belief, but Greyhaven's priests usually taught that a true mate mark was destiny made visible. Possibility, I repeated. I prefer it. So do I. She looked relieved. That hurt more than I expected. You thought I might use the mark to change our agreement. Sabine did not answer immediately. I did not know. You should have. Her eyes rose. I mean that as a failure of mine, I said, not yours. She looked down again. I came around the desk but stopped several feet away. The mark changes nothing you do not want changed. Even if the priests call me your fated mate. Especially then. Something in her face loosened. My father used to say fate is only honorable when it knocks, I said, not when it breaks the door. Sabine smiled faintly. Your father sounds wiser than his portraits. He was much shorter, too. She laughed. I wanted to touch her hand. I did not. The choice mattered. Would you like to investigate the marks? I asked. With the priests. With anyone you trust. I trust Mistress Avon at the herb house. Then we ask Mistress Avon. And if she says we are destined. I took a breath. Then destiny may wait until we are ready. Sabine's eyes shone suddenly. She blinked once and looked toward the fire. I pretended not to see. The next morning she sent me a note. Thank you for knocking. I kept that scrap of paper in the inner drawer of my desk for years. Mistress Avon confirmed Sabine's explanation. The mark was old wolf magic, older than crowns. It was not ownership, it was response. Think of two bells, the old healer told us. One may ring and wake the other, but neither can force the other to sing. Sabine liked that so much she repeated it to every priest who tried to use the word inevitable. The court, unfortunately, learned about the marks within a week. Courts can discover a secret through a stone wall. Suddenly, every dinner invitation became an inspection. Noblewomen watched Sabine's hands. Ministers studied mine. The high priest requested a public blessing. We refused. Then the southern delegation sent congratulations before either of us had told them. Sabine read the letter twice and went very still. What is it? She handed it to me. Her uncle had written that the completion of the royal mate bond would strengthen House Arlo's claim to permanent control of the marsh tolls. The words were dressed in affection. Their meaning was not. Sabine walked to the window. I read the letter again. Anger came cold this time. They are treating you as leverage. They always have. I looked at her back. The sentence was too practiced. How long? She was quiet. Sabine. My mother died when I was 15. My father followed 2 years later. Uncle managed the estate. He was never cruel. That was not the same as kind. He found me useful, she continued. I could read accounts. I remembered names. I could smooth arguments at dinners. When neighboring houses proposed matches, he considered which road or mill each one might bring. Did you refuse them? 3. And he allowed it. He reminded me each time how expensive independence was. I felt my jaw tighten. The 4th proposal was ours. She turned. I accepted because villages were burning along the marsh, because I believed you would keep your word, Because your terms did not ask me to surrender my property or dismiss my household. I chose this, Rowan. She almost never used my name. The sound of it in her voice silenced my anger. But I will not become a chain around your neck, because my uncle discovers destiny is profitable. You are not a chain. You know what I mean. I did. The silver line on my hand warmed. Sabine looked at it. So does that, she said quietly. For the first time, I wondered whether the thing we both feared was not the bond itself, but everyone else's hunger to define it before we could. Then we define it, I said. How? Slowly. She gave me an exasperated look. That is not a plan. It is the beginning of one. I moved toward the table and spread a blank sheet of paper. Sabine stared. What are you doing? Writing terms. For fate. For us. Her mouth opened. I dipped the pen. First term, no priest announces anything without our consent. She came closer. Second, no family member negotiates using the mark. I wrote it. Third, she said, we are allowed to be foolish without the kingdom turning it into prophecy. I looked up, define foolish. Dancing badly. Sending pairs, jealousy. My pen stopped. Sabine's eyes gleamed. You noticed. I notice everything. You nearly crushed your cup when Lord Varick touched my hand. He is an excellent commander. That was not an answer. I set down the pen. No, I said, it was not. The humor left her face. I could have retreated. Instead, I chose honesty, because that was the first thing she had asked of me. I was jealous. Her breath changed. I had no right to be. You are my husband. By agreement. And perhaps by an unfinished mark. Neither gives me ownership of your attention. Sabine looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached for the pen. Fourth term, she said, writing in her small, precise hand. We are allowed to tell the truth, even when it complicates the treaty. I read the line. Agreed. She put the pen down. Were you very jealous? I should have lied. Painfully. Sabine smiled. The silver line on her hand brightened. Mine answered. Neither of us mentioned it. But that night, for the first time since our wedding, the door between our rooms remained open. Leaving the door open changed less than either of us expected, and more than I knew how to admit. We did not suddenly become lovers. Sabine did not begin sleeping in my bed, and I did not start composing poetry beneath her window. Greyhaven would have collapsed from embarrassment if I had tried. What changed was simpler. She began walking through the open doorway when she could not sleep. The first time, I was reading reports by the fire at nearly midnight. She appeared in a blue robe over her nightdress, hair loose down her back, carrying 2 cups of warm milk. I was told this helps, she said. With insomnia. With kings who mistake midnight for office hours. She gave me 1 cup and sat on the rug beside Ash. I should have returned to the reports. Instead, I joined her. We spoke until the fire burned low. Not about treaties, not about grain. She told me she had once tried to keep bees and been defeated by them within a week. I told her about the goose and the pond because Myrle had already threatened to reveal it. Sabine laughed so hard she spilled milk on Ash, who looked personally betrayed. The silver marks warmed once faintly. Then nothing. It became a pattern. Some nights we talked for 10 minutes, some for an hour. Sometimes she simply sat by the fire reading while I finished work. The silence between us stopped feeling like distance. By first frost, I knew how she took her tea, which hymns she disliked, why she kept the little key around her neck, and that she always touched the edge of a table before delivering bad news. The key had belonged to her mother. It opened her writing desk, Sabine told me one evening. The desk is gone. Uncle sold it after father died. Why keep the key? Because it still opens something. What? Her fingers closed around it. Memory, I suppose. I understood that answer too well. A week later, I asked the palace carpenter to build her a writing desk with a lock fitted to the old key. I nearly ruined the gesture by ordering it in secret. Sabine discovered the measurements on a work slip before the desk was finished. She marched into my study holding the paper. Are you building something in my room? I looked at the evidence. Yes. Without asking. I winced. Her expression softened before I could apologize. What is it? A mistake, apparently. Rowan. A desk. She went still. I explained about the key. For once, Sabine had no quick answer. When the desk arrived, she ran her hand across the walnut lid, placed the old key in the lock, and turned it. The mechanism clicked. She stood there for a long time. Then she looked at me with tears she did not hide. You remembered? Yes. She crossed the room and embraced me. It was the first time she had done so. I froze for half a heartbeat, afraid even joy might become something I took too quickly. Then her arms tightened. I held her. The unfinished mark on my hand flared warm enough to make me gasp. Sabine pulled back. The silver curve had grown. Not completed. Another thin line had joined it, forming the beginning of a circle. She looked from my hand to hers. Apparently desks are dangerous. I laughed against the ache in my throat. We should ban furniture. Immediately. The danger that winter did not come from furniture. It came from the marsh. 3 villages along the southern border reported wolves disappearing from the reed country. At first, we assumed poachers. Then a patrol found iron traps baited with blood near the old causeway. The traps were illegal in both territories. Not because wolves were sacred in some sentimental sense, though many believed they were. They were illegal because iron-jaw traps did not care whether they caught a wolf, a farm dog, or a child crossing reeds at dusk. I sent writers. Sabine asked to see the trap reports. When she finished reading, she touched the table edge. Bad news. What? I asked. The locations. She spread a map between us. Look, East Bank, Reed Bridge, Salt Ford, these are not random. I saw it then. The traps formed a rough line along the new joint patrol route. Someone is testing response times, I said, or trying to make each side blame the other. The raids had stopped after our marriage because Greyhaven and the southern houses were cooperating. If someone profited from division, frightening villagers and killing wolves was an efficient beginning. I summoned my commander. Sabine remained. No one questioned it anymore. Within 2 days, we learned that 3 shipments of trap iron had entered the marsh under forged permits. The permits bore House Arlo's seal. Sabine stared at the copies. That seal is real. I watched her carefully. Could your uncle have authorized them? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Pain arrived afterward. He would tell himself the traps were for boar, she said. If someone paid enough, he might choose not to ask. You do not have to defend him. I am not. She folded the papers. I am trying to be accurate. That was Sabine. Even hurt, she wanted truth more than comfort. We rode south together. The council objected. I ignored them. Sabine did not need my protection from the possibility that her family had betrayed the peace. She needed the right to face it. We traveled with 20 guards, 2 scouts, Myrle and Ash, who had decided retirement was a suggestion. The marsh country was unlike Greyhaven's stone valleys. The road floated between black pools and fields of amber reeds. Houses stood on raised earth, connected by plank walks. Bells hung from willow posts to guide travelers when fog swallowed the paths. Sabine changed as we rode. She became more watchful, more familiar. She knew which bridges creaked, which farm kept geese that attacked strangers, which widow made the strongest onion soup in 3 counties. People recognized her. Not as queen at first. Lady Sabine, an old ferryman, shouted from the bank, "You came back." She turned in the saddle and smiled. By the second village, women were bringing her petitions. By the third, a farmer handed her a broken toll token and complained directly about the new collector. Sabine listened to everyone. I saw then that she had not learned public work in Greyhaven. She had been doing it all her life without title or credit. At dusk on the second day, we stopped at a roadside inn near Maricross. The innkeeper bowed to me and hugged Sabine. I liked her immediately. Over stew, she told us the first trap had been found 6 weeks earlier. Men came before that, she said, not locals, paid silver for questions. What questions? I asked. Patrol schedules, which lords' men used which road, whether the new queen still had friends here. Sabine's spoon stopped. Did they ask my name? Not directly, the innkeeper frowned. They called you the Peace Bride. I felt something cold settle in me. The marriage was not merely part of the situation. It was the target. That night Sabine stood outside our adjoining rooms at the inn, looking down the dark corridor. You should stay with Myril, I said. No. Sabine. You promised not to turn protection into a cage. I also promised protection. Then protect me without removing me. I exhaled through my nose. She held up one hand. I have a knife. You hold it like a kitchen spoon. That sounds judgmental. It is experienced. She almost smiled. Then the humor faded. I need to see my uncle tomorrow. I know. He may have signed those permits. I know. What if he did? There were answers a king could give: arrest, trial, restitution. She was not asking a king. I stepped closer. If he did, you will be allowed to grieve the man you wished he was, and still hold accountable the man he chose to be. Her eyes filled. That sounds suspiciously wise. My sister says it once happened. Sabine laughed through the tears. Then she reached for my hand. Our marks warmed. Stay, she said. It was the first time she had asked. I stayed. Nothing improper happened, nothing needed to. We sat side by side on the narrow bed, boots on the floor, shoulders touching, speaking until the candles burned out. When she finally fell asleep against me, I did not move for hours. I had held wounded soldiers who trusted me with their lives. I had carried my father from a battlefield. I had stood beneath the crown while thousands swore loyalty. None of it felt like the trust of that quiet weight against my shoulder. At dawn, Sabine woke, realized where she was, and whispered, "Your arm is numb." Completely. You should have moved. You were sleeping. That was foolish. Fourth term. Her sleepy smile stayed with me all morning. House Arlo's marsh seat stood on a low rise above the reeds, more fortress than manor. Lord Arlo met us in the courtyard wearing ceremonial gray, surprise hidden badly behind courtesy. Niece. Uncle. He bowed to me. Your Majesty, we had no notice. That was intentional. His eyes flicked toward our guards. Sabine did not wait for tea. She placed the forged permits on his hall table. Did you sign these? Lord Arlo's face changed. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. I signed transport permits for hunting equipment. To whom? A merchant consortium from Eastmere. Names. He stiffened. Sabine, this is Crown business. She went very quiet. Before I could speak, she looked at him. I am the Crown business. The words struck the room clean. Lord Arlo glanced at me, perhaps expecting correction. I gave him none. Sabine continued. Those traps were placed along joint patrol routes. Someone is trying to break the peace. They used your seal. Tell me who paid you. I was not paid. Who paid your steward? His silence answered. A door opened at the far end of the hall. His steward ran. Ash moved before any guard. The old wolf crossed the room in a blur and struck the man behind the knees. He hit the floor with a cry, uninjured except for pride. A packet of papers scattered from inside his coat. Myrtle picked one up. Well, she said, that seems useful. The papers named 3 merchants, 2 minor lords, and a militia captain from Eastmere. Their plan was simple: provoke attacks, blame Greyhaven wolves, pressure southern villages to withdraw from joint patrols, then restore the old private toll roads controlled by the consortium. People would die so 6 men could recover lost profit. I had seen wars begin for less. Lord Arlo sat down heavily. I did not know. Sabine looked at him. You did not ask. He flinched. You taught me that ignorance was not innocence when I was 12 and misplaced a rent book, she said. Does the lesson change when the mistake is yours? He had no answer. We arrested the steward and sent riders for the others. Lord Arlo was not imprisoned. His failure had been negligence and vanity, not conspiracy, but he lost control of the marsh permits pending investigation. For a man like him, public responsibility hurt more than a locked room. Sabine did not celebrate. That evening she stood alone on the raised walk behind the manor, looking over the reeds. I joined her. He loved my father, she said. I waited. He kept us fed after father died. He paid the servants. He made sure no creditor took the house. I kept telling myself that meant his choices for me came from care. Some may have. And some came from convenience. Yes. She wiped one cheek angrily. I hate that both can be true. So do I. Sabine leaned on the rail. I thought marriage to you would be the last useful thing I did for him. The sentence hurt. And now, I asked. She turned toward me. Now it is the first thing I did for myself that frightened me enough to call it duty. I could not breathe for a moment. The reeds hissed in the evening wind. Sabine. She stepped closer. I do not know if this is fate, she said. I do not know if the mark would have appeared with someone else, or in another life, or if old magic is simply very dramatic. I smiled despite the pounding of my heart. But I know I look for you when I enter a room. The silver line in my hand burned bright. I know I save things to tell you. Another line appeared. I know I sleep better when the door is open. Her voice shook. I reached for her, then stopped before touching. May I? Sabine closed the distance herself. Her hands rested against my chest. Yes. I kissed her. Gently. No thunder, no wolves howling to the moon, no court gasping around us. Only Sabine, warm beneath my hands, and the impossible relief of discovering that tenderness could feel more powerful than conquest. When we parted, the marks on our hands had nearly formed full circles. Nearly. Sabine looked down and laughed softly. Still listening. Apparently we have more to say. We did. We had no idea how much. The arrests should have ended the matter. Instead they exposed how far the rot had spread. 2 of the Eastmere merchants confessed within a week. The militia captain disappeared before our riders reached him. One minor lord claimed innocence and produced records proving he had been used as a name on false contracts. The other, Lord Carden, sent me a letter so polished it might have been written on ice. He denied everything. Then he invited Sabine to testify before the Southern Council. Not me, sir. The message was clever. If she refused, he could say the new queen feared scrutiny. If she appeared and faltered, he could turn her marriage into evidence of northern manipulation. I wanted to forbid it. Sabine saw the thought on my face. Do not. I said nothing. You have a forbidding forehead. I have a what? The line appears here. She touched between her own brows. It means you are about to issue an order you will later pretend was merely advice. Myrle, seated near the fire, began laughing. I ignored her. The Southern Council is hostile ground, I said. It is also my ground. Carden chose you because he thinks he can make you look compromised. Then he has chosen poorly. I looked at my wife, the woman who had arrived in a rain-soaked dress asking whether I intended to love her had become dangerous in a different way. Not because I had given her a crown, because she had finally begun using the authority she had always carried. What do you need from me? I asked. Sabine considered. Sit behind me. Behind you. Yes. That may be the first time anyone has asked an Alpha King to do that. Then enjoy the novelty. Myrle laughed harder. The Southern Council met at Bellwater Hall, an old assembly house built on stone piers above the marsh. Its chamber was round, with no throne and no raised dais. Families who hated one another had been forced for centuries to sit at the same height. I respected the architecture. Sabine entered first. I walked behind her. Every head turned. Lord Carden sat across the circle, silver-haired and elegant, with the calm smile of a man who had spent a lifetime making other people doubt what they knew. Your Majesty, he said to me. I gestured toward Sabine. You summoned the Queen. A murmur moved around the room. Sabine took her seat. For 3 hours Carden questioned her. He asked whether she had access to Greyhaven military schedules. Yes. Whether she had influenced the placement of patrols. Yes. Whether her marriage benefited House Arlo. Yes. Each honest answer seemed to please him. Then he asked, would it be fair to say, Your Grace, that your loyalties are divided? Sabine folded her hands. No. Carden smiled. You were born here and now wear a northern crown. Those facts do not divide me. They must. Only if loyalty means agreeing with whichever man owns the nearest seal. A few counselors shifted. Carden's smile thinned. Sabine continued. My loyalty is to the peace we signed, the villages paying our levies, the guards keeping the roads open, and the law that applies whether the offender is my husband, my uncle, or you. The room changed. Carden leaned back. And if your husband ordered something against Southern interest? Sabine glanced over her shoulder at me. I would tell him he was wrong. Several men laughed nervously. I said she has. More laughter. Carden did not join it. He produced a copy of our marriage agreement. This union began as political convenience. Yes, Sabine said. No love. No claim of love. And now old superstition conveniently suggests you are fated mates. I saw the trap. So did she. Sabine held up her hand. The nearly completed silver circle showed plainly. Convenient would have been a finished mark on our wedding day. The chamber quieted. This appeared weeks later, she said, after we had disagreed, worked, offended one another, apologized, danced badly, and chosen to keep talking. If you wish to call that superstition, do so. It has no bearing on forged permits. Carden's face hardened. Sabine leaned forward. You asked whether my loyalty is divided. Yours appears remarkably focused. She placed 3 account books on the table. Carden stopped breathing. I had not seen those books. Neither had most of the council. Sabine looked at me once, almost apologetically. Later she would tell me she had asked one of her father's old clerks to search toll records while we were still at House Arlo. The clerk had found payments routed through shell companies into Carden's estate. At the time, all I knew was that my wife had just placed a blade made of arithmetic against a traitor's throat. Your consortium purchased trap iron, she said. Your factor paid my uncle S. Steward. Your men hired strangers to map patrol routes, and 3 days after the first village blamed Greyhaven, your private ferry company raised rates on the alternate road. Carden looked toward the door. My guards were already there. His composure cracked. This is Northern Theater. No, Sabine said, this is Southern bookkeeping. The vote to detain him was nearly unanimous. Afterward, outside Bellwater Hall, I found Sabine standing beneath the eaves while rain silvered the marsh. You had the account books. Yes. You did not tell me. I wanted independent confirmation before I accused him. You could have been in danger. She turned. The forbidding line appeared in my forehead. Sabine pointed at it. There. Despite myself, I laughed. Then she stepped closer. I knew you would be behind me. The words undid whatever anger remained. Not in front of her. Not speaking for her. Behind her. Exactly where she had asked me to be. I took her hand. The marks warmed, but they did not complete. We returned to Greyhaven before winter sealed the high roads. For a time, life became almost peaceful. Carden's network collapsed. The marsh villages elected a joint toll board with seats for farmers and ferrymen. Lord Arlo resigned from 2 committees and, to his credit, did not complain publicly. He sent Sabine a letter containing no excuses. She read it twice, then put it in the new desk. Our marriage changed too. The door between our rooms stopped mattering, because one of us was usually in the other's room anyway. We still kept both chambers. Sabine insisted. A lock I control, she reminded me. I never forgot again. There were kisses now, long conversations, walks in weather sensible people avoided, arguments about whether the palace kitchens needed 3 kinds of plum preserve. They do, Sabine said. No household needs 3. A kingdom is judged by its preserves. By whom? People with standards. I ordered a 4th kind made solely to irritate her. She labeled the jar Royal Excess and served it to me every morning for a month. The court became used to seeing us together. That brought a new problem. Expectation. The high priest began quietly asking when we would hold a mate confirmation rite. My council wanted the bond publicly recognized before the spring assembly. Southern leaders wanted certainty about succession. Every request was polite. Together they became a wall. Sabine felt it before I did. At a winter banquet, an elderly duchess took her hand and said, "How wonderful it will be when the circle finally closes." Sabine smiled. But that night she shut the connecting door. I stood on my side of it for a long moment. Then I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Sabine. I am tired. I know. Silence. I rested my palm against the wood. I will be in my room. Still nothing. I went back. An hour later, a note slid beneath the door. Thank you for knocking. The same words as months before. This time they hurt. The next morning Sabine came to breakfast composed and distant. I waited until the servants left. What happened? Nothing. That answer violates our fourth term. She closed her eyes. Everyone is waiting for me to complete the mark. Yes. I can feel them looking at my hand. I can stop the public questions. You cannot stop the private ones. No. She pushed away her tea. I thought I had escaped being useful. The sentence landed hard. I sat back. Sabine looked ashamed of it. I know that is unfair. No. You have done nothing wrong. That does not make the feeling false. She stared at the table. What if the mark never closes? Then it never closes. What if I disappoint your counsel? They survive disappointment poorly, but repeatedly. She almost smiled. What if I disappoint you? There it was. The fear beneath all the others. I stood and walked around the table. Sabine watched me approach. I stopped before touching her. You cannot disappoint me by failing to become a symbol. Her eyes filled. You say that now. I said it before the mark appeared. That was different. No, it was easier. She looked confused. I cared less then, I said. The truth came rougher than I intended. Now I care enough that every frightened part of me wants certainty. I want the circle to close. I want some ancient magic to tell me you will still be here in 30 years. I want to know I cannot lose you. Sabine's breath caught. But wanting certainty is not the same as being owed it. I knelt beside her chair. If the mark vanished tomorrow, I would still know your handwriting before opening a note. I would still hate Varick's dancing. I would still know you hide bad news behind your left thumb. I would still build you a desk badly and forget to ask permission first. A tear slipped down her cheek. And I would still choose you. The silver mark on my hand brightened. Sabine looked at it. Then at hers. Neither completed. She laughed through tears. Old magic has terrible dramatic instincts. I smiled. Perhaps it is waiting for a better speech. Yours was acceptable. High praise. She touched my face. That evening I issued a simple order. No court official, priest, minister, or visiting noble was to ask the Queen about the completion of the mate mark. The penalty was not imprisonment. It was worse. Anyone who violated the rule would spend one full day reviewing grain spoilage reports with Sabine. No one violated it twice. Spring came late. With it came the anniversary of my mother's death. I had not told Sabine the date. I did not need to. She found me before dawn in the old chapel, sitting alone in the rear pew. The cedar box rested beside me. For 9 years I had visited there alone. Sabine did not ask whether she could stay. She stood at the end of the pew until I moved my cloak aside. Then she sat. For a long while neither of us spoke. My mother loved this chapel, I said eventually. She hated the royal gallery, said God could hear kings from the floor. Sabine smiled faintly. She sounds sensible. She would have liked you. How do you know? She distrusted anyone who enjoyed ceremony too much. That is compelling evidence. I opened the cedar box. The moon-silver ring lay exactly where it had on our wedding day. Sabine looked at it but did not reach. I nearly gave you this because it was expected, I said. I remember. You refused it because you understood the difference between tradition and meaning better than I did. She glanced at me. I lifted the ring. Now I want you to have it. Sabine's face changed. Because of the mark. No. The council. No. Because I am queen. No. I took her left hand. Because when I imagine this ring after I am gone, I do not imagine it in a treasury. I imagine it in your desk beside your mother's key. I imagine you telling someone my mother was shorter than her portraits. I imagine it belonging to the life we made, not the crown I inherited. Sabine closed her eyes. Rowan, I love you. I had known for months. Saying it felt less like stepping off a cliff than coming home after a long road. Sabine opened her eyes. I love you too. The marks blazed. For one heartbeat, I thought the circles would close. They did not. The silver light faded back to its unfinished shape. Sabine stared. I stared. Then she began laughing. I joined her until we were both bent forward in the quiet chapel, grieving my mother and mocking destiny in the same breath. When we finally calmed, I slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. Nothing magical happened. That perhaps should have warned us. The warning arrived 6 days later in the form of a law older than anyone in my council remembered. Chancellor Barron found it while preparing documents for the spring assembly. He came into my study carrying a leather-bound codebook with the expression of a man who wished the book had caught fire before he opened it. Sabine was at the window sorting petitions. What happened? I asked. Barron set the volume on my desk. Your Majesty, there is a succession clause concerning bonded queens from independent territories. Sabine looked up. I disliked the sentence immediately. Barron turned to a marked page. The law had been written 213 years earlier after a border queen married a Greyhaven king during a civil war. It stated that if a ruling alpha's mate completed the royal bond while wearing the dowager ring of the Queen Mother, her hereditary lands would be considered joined permanently to the crown, unless excluded by charter before the bond's public recognition. I read it twice, then a third time. Sabine did not move. What does that mean for House Arlo? She asked. Barron swallowed. Your Grace, your personal estates include the Maricross Ferries and 3 marsh villages held in hereditary trust. I know what I own. If the mark completes while you wear Queen Marith's ring, certain traditionalists could argue those lands pass into Greyhaven Crown property. Silence filled the room. I closed the book. No. Barron looked relieved and terrified at once. No. No one argues it. Draft a charter excluding Sabine's lands. There is a complication. Of course there was. The spring assembly begins tomorrow. Under the old law, any exclusion must be ratified before public recognition of the bond. The bond is not complete. No, Your Majesty. Then we have time. Sabine's voice came quietly. Do we? I turned. She was looking at the ring on her finger. The unfinished mark beneath it seemed suddenly less like a promise and more like a trap built by dead men. I stood. We do. Tomorrow the Southern delegates arrive. We draft the charter tonight. And if they refuse, then I refuse recognition. Barron shifted. Your Majesty, the Assembly may claim the matter is automatic if the mark completes in public. I looked at him. It will not. I had no right to make that promise. Sabine heard it anyway. What if it does? She asked. I met her eyes. Then I will stand before the Assembly and tell them their law is unjust. That does not erase the law. No, but it begins the fight. Sabine turned back toward the window. I wanted to go to her. I did not know whether she wanted me there. Barron, I said, leave the codebook. Bring every charter relating to Southern property and royal marriage. Wake the legal clerks. He hurried out. When the door closed, Sabine reached for the leather cord at her throat. Her mother's key. I should have known there would be another way to make me useful. This is not your uncle. No, it is worse. It is tradition. I crossed the room slowly. Sabine. She looked at me. I will not take your lands. I know you will not. Then what are you afraid of? That you will have to choose between me and your crown. The answer was immediate. You. She flinched as though I had shouted. I stepped closer. You, I repeated, not because the crown means nothing, because it is supposed to protect people, not consume them. Her eyes filled. Do not say that lightly. I am not. What if the council threatens abdication? Then they will learn how inconvenient my sister can be as queen. From the corridor, Mio called. I heard that. Sabine laughed despite herself. The sound broke the fear for a moment. We worked through the night. Legal clerks carried stacks of records into the study. Baron found a precedent from 80 years earlier allowing property exclusion by mutual declaration. Mio found another law stating no wolf bond could transfer land without consent of the bonded party, though it had been ignored for generations. At dawn we had a charter. It stated plainly that Sabine's southern estates remained hers, that marriage conveyed no automatic ownership, and that any future inheritance would follow the law of the land where it originated. I signed first. Sabine signed second. The council signed after varying degrees of outrage. The Southern Assembly was less cooperative. By noon, word of the ancient clause had spread. Some lords argued that transferring Sabine's estates to Greyhaven would stabilize the border. Others claimed the opposite, that the clause proved the North intended annexation all along. Carden's remaining allies seized the confusion. Within hours, the Spring Assembly had become exactly what our marriage had been designed to prevent. North against South, suspicion feeding suspicion. Sabine stood beside me in the great hall, listening to men argue about her land while barely looking at her. I watched her fingers touch the table edge. Bad news. Then Lord Arlo rose. The hall quieted. He looked older than he had in autumn. Some men become smaller after public failure. He seemed more careful. The land belongs to my niece, he said. A southern lord objected. By marriage. By inheritance, Arlo cut in. From her father, my brother. He looked at Sabine. I spent too many years treating her judgment as a resource belonging to our house. I will not now pretend her property belongs to another simply because she married well. Sabine stared at him. He bowed his head. It was not forgiveness. It was a beginning. The debate continued. By evening, we had enough votes for the charter if the bond remained incomplete until formal ratification the next morning. That should have been simple. Then the high priest announced that tradition required Sabine and me to open the moon assembly together at sunset. I refused. Half the northern lords protested. The priest insisted the opening was ceremonial, not a recognition rite. Baron whispered, legally he is correct. I looked at Sabine. She had gone pale. No, I said. Sabine touched my arm. Wait. I turned. If we refuse to appear, Carden's allies will say we fear the bond. I do not care what they say. I do. Why? Because fear should not decide this either. She looked around the hall. I am tired of making choices based on what other people might take from me. The words were quiet, but they were Sabine at her strongest. What do you want? I asked. To open the assembly. Wearing the ring. She looked down at my mother's ring. For the first time since I had given it to her, uncertainty crossed her face. I do not know. Then do not decide now. The assembly gathered in the moon court at sunset. The court was an ancient circle of pale stone open to the sky. Hundreds of lanterns burned along the walls. Greyhaven wolves moved among the edges, calm beneath the rising moon. Northern nobles stood on one side, southern delegates on the other, though I had ordered the seating mixed. Old habits were harder to command than chairs. Sabine waited with me behind the carved doors. She wore dark blue, simple and fully covered, her hair braided with no crown. My mother's ring remained on her hand. The unfinished mark beneath it shone faintly. "Still time to leave," I said. Sabine breathed out. "Is that what you want?" "No. What do you want?" I looked at her. The honest answer was dangerous. "You beside me." Her eyes softened. "Then we agree." The doors opened. We walked into the moon court together. The high priest raised his staff. "Greyhaven receives its king and queen." The crowd bowed. Sabine's hand found mine. Warmth moved through our palms. The mark brightened. A murmur passed through the assembly. I felt Sabine tense. "Look at me," I whispered. She did. The silver circle on her hand crept closer to completion. So did mine. The priest's eyes widened. Someone in the crowd whispered, "The bond." Another voice answered, "The lands join tonight." Sabine heard it. I felt her hand go cold. The circle advanced another fraction. Then stopped. She pulled her hand from mine. The court erupted in whispers. I turned toward the crowd. Silence. It came instantly. Sabine stood beside me, breathing hard. I wanted to shield her from every eye. Instead, I asked, softly enough that only she could hear, "What do you need?" She looked at the ring. Then at me. "Your hand." I offered it. Sabine slowly removed my mother's ring from her finger. The whole court watched. She placed it in my open palm. There it was, the moment no treaty writer, priest, or counselor had imagined. My bride returning the Queen Mother's ring before the entire assembly. A gasp moved through the stone court. The high priest lowered his staff. Lord Arlo closed his eyes. I looked at the ring in my hand. Then at Sabine. Her face was pale but steady. "I love you," she said. No one moved. "I love the life we have made. I would choose you again." My throat tightened. "But I will not let an old law turn your mother's gift into a deed of surrender." I closed my fingers around the ring. "You should not." Several nobles began speaking at once. I raised one hand. Silence returned. Sabine continued, now addressing the assembly. "I was sent north because men believed marriage could solve what they had failed to solve by listening. I agreed because I wanted peace. I stayed because I found partnership." Her eyes moved across north and south alike. "If this bond is real, it cannot require me to disappear into it." The unfinished silver circle on her hand dimmed. A northern lord stepped forward. "Your Grace, no one asks you to disappear. The law merely joins." "No," I said. He stopped. I opened my hand, so the moon's silver ring lay visible on my palm. "The Queen has returned this freely. I accept her decision." The high priest looked alarmed. "Your Majesty, the Dowager ring is part of the royal recognition." "Then recognition can wait. The realm requires certainty. The realm requires justice." I turned toward the assembly. "My mother wore this ring because my father loved her, not because it transferred property, not because a council needed evidence. I gave it to Sabine when I knew I loved her. If wearing it now threatens what is hers, then I will keep it until our laws are worthy of the gift." The silver mark on my hand faded almost completely. A frightened murmur spread. Sabine saw it. Pain crossed her face. I did not care. I stepped down from the central stone. The priest stared. "Your Majesty, where are you going?" "To ratify the charter." It cannot be ratified until morning. Then we will have a long night. Meyer laughed from somewhere in the crowd. That broke the paralysis. Lord Arlo stepped forward first. I will sign. Then the Maricross Ferryman representative raised his hand. So will I. A northern widow who held a village seat followed. One by one, people moved. Not all nobles, not all powerful, but enough. We carried the debate back into the great hall and worked until dawn. The old land transfer clause was suspended first, then repealed by emergency consent. The new charter passed with 2 additional protections Sabine demanded. No marriage involving hereditary land could transfer ownership without a separate written agreement, and no mate bond could be used as legal evidence of consent. The high priest opposed the second clause for almost an hour. Sabine asked him one question. Can sacred love exist without freedom? He did not answer quickly enough. The clause passed. At sunrise, the hall emptied. Sabine and I were left at the long table surrounded by cold candles, ink-stained cloth, and cups no one remembered filling. My mother's ring still rested in my pocket. Our marks were barely visible. Sabine stared at her hand. I am sorry. I looked at her. For what? The mark. Do not apologize for magic having opinions. She did not smile. I thought it meant something. It did. It is fading. Yes. What if returning the ring broke it? I reached across the table. Sabine gave me her hand. Then we keep everything that mattered and lose a bit of silver. Tears filled her eyes. You mean that? Yes. She squeezed my hand. No warmth answered. For the first time in months, the bond was silent. We went asleep after sunrise in separate rooms, because we were too tired to cross the connecting doorway. I woke near noon to Ash scratching at my door. The old wolf pushed inside before I could open it fully, walked to the connecting door, and stared at me. What? He stared. Do not become dramatic in your old age. He scratched once. I opened the door. Sabine's room was empty. Her writing desk stood open. The old key remained in the lock. On the desk lay a note. I have gone to the chapel. Please do not summon the kingdom. I smiled despite the sudden fear. Ash and I went alone. Sabine sat in the rear pew where I had mourned my mother. No crown, no attendants, no assembly. She looked up when I entered. I said not to summon the kingdom. I brought one retired wolf. Ash lay down with a sigh. Sabine looked at my hand. Do you have the ring? Yes. May I see it? I sat beside her and placed it in her palm. She turned it slowly beneath the chapel light. I keep thinking I rejected your mother. No. I know that is foolish. You rejected a law. With her ring. My mother would have approved. You cannot know that. I can. How? Because she once threw a duke's ceremonial cup into a fountain when he proposed a tax on mill workers. Sabine stared. I nodded solemnly. She had excellent aim. A laugh escaped her. I loved that sound. I took the ring from her palm. Sabine, look at me. She did. I gave you this because I loved you. You returned it because you refused to let love become surrender. Both choices were right. Her eyes filled again. What happens now? Nothing ceremonial. That sounds promising. I closed my hand around the ring. Would you like it back? Sabine thought for a long moment. Then she shook her head. Not today. Something inside me settled. Not disappointment. Peace. All right. She watched my face carefully. That easy? Yes. What if I never wear it again? Then I will keep it. What if I want another ring? I will buy you one. With whose money? Mine. You mean the treasury. I have personal funds. From where? My mother left me an orchard. Sabine narrowed her eyes. You own an orchard. Apparently this marriage has secrets. She laughed again. Then the chapel bell rang. Once, no one was pulling the rope. Ash lifted his head. Sabine stopped laughing. The ring in my hand became warm. Not hot. Warm like skin. I opened my fingers. The river pearl had begun to glow. Sabine stared. What is it doing? I have no idea. The old legend returned to me. The ring warmed when given in true devotion. I had always assumed the giving meant placing it on someone's hand. Perhaps we had misunderstood. Perhaps the gift was not the object. Perhaps it was the freedom to refuse it. The silver mark on Sabine's hand appeared again. Not slowly. The full circle bloomed at once, bright and complete. Mine answered. I stopped breathing. Sabine looked down. The circle was unlike the old priestly drawings. A small break remained at the bottom, shaped like an open doorway. My mark carried the same opening. Ash stood and came to us. He did not bow. He rested his head across both our knees. Sabine began to cry. I laughed because I was crying too. So much for no ceremony, she whispered. This is not ceremony. What is it? I looked at the open shape in the silver mark. A door. Sabine touched it with one finger. Still open. Always. The ring's glow faded to a soft sheen. I did not put it on her finger. Not that day. We walked out of the chapel hand in hand, with no priest to announce us and no council waiting to interpret what had happened. The first people to see the completed marks were two kitchen maids carrying flour. One gasped. The other dropped the sack. Flour covered both their shoes. Sabine looked at me. I looked at her. Then we laughed so loudly, the maids began laughing too. The kingdom, naturally, learned by supper. By the next morning, 3 songs had already been written about the open circle marks. 2 were terrible. One claimed lightning struck the chapel roof. Another said every wolf in Greyhaven howled at once. None mentioned the flower. Sabine considered that a serious failure of historical accuracy. We refused a grand recognition rite. Instead, 1 week later, we stood before the spring assembly and showed them the marks ourselves. Sabine spoke first. She explained the open break in the circle as we understood it, a bond completed by choice and still shaped by choice. The high priest, after several days of reading older texts, admitted he had found a forgotten passage describing the same sign. A joined path with an unbarred gate, he read. Sabine glanced at me. I like door better. So do I. The charter protecting independent property was entered into law that afternoon. Lord Arlo asked to speak with Sabine afterward. I started to follow. She looked at me. I stopped. Behind her she mouthed. I obeyed. From across the courtyard I watched uncle and niece speak beneath the bare-limbed pear trees. Arlo did not touch her. He did not make a performance of regret. He handed her a small wooden box. Later, Sabine showed me what was inside. Her mother's writing desk key had once had a twin. Lord Arlo had found it among old estate papers. With it was a note in her mother's hand, written years before her death. For Sabine, when she is old enough to own what she chooses. Sabine read the line 3 times. Then she sat at her new desk and cried with both keys in her palm. I did not try to fix the grief. I sat beside her until it passed. That summer we traveled the marsh roads without ceremony. The new toll board had reduced fees. Joint patrols used bells instead of traps to mark dangerous crossings. The widows who had once petitioned each winter now held permanent deeds. At Maricross, the old ferryman saw our completed marks and shouted, "About time." Sabine shouted back, "We were busy." I nearly fell off my horse laughing. Lord Varick visited in midsummer. At the feast he approached Sabine with exaggerated caution. "Your Grace, may I request a dance without starting a constitutional crisis?" Sabine looked at me. I considered him. "No," I said. Varick sighed. Sabine stepped on my boot beneath the table. I corrected myself. "The Queen may dance with whomever she pleases." Varick bowed. Sabine smiled sweetly. "Thank you, but I prefer dancers with worse technique. It protects my reputation." She held out her hand to me. I took it. The open circle marks glimmered softly. We danced badly together. Years later, people would tell the story differently depending on what they needed from it. Priests spoke of sacred bonds. Lawyers spoke of the charter. Southern farmers remembered lower tolls. Northern widows remembered deeds that could no longer be revoked. Poets insisted my mother's ring had blazed like a second moon. The truth was smaller and better. I kept the ring in my pocket for nearly a year after Sabine returned it. Then one quiet evening, while rain tapped the windows exactly as it had the day we met, she came into my study carrying 2 cups of warm milk. She sat on the rug beside an old sleeping ash and held out her left hand. "I think I would like the ring now." I looked at her. "Why tonight?" "Because no one is watching." That answer was so perfectly hers that I had to look away for a moment. I took the ring from the cedar box. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Because it was my mother's?" "No." "Because you are queen?" "No." "Because of the mark?" Sabine smiled. "Because you gave me the right to give it back." I slid the ring onto her finger. It warmed between us, gentle as a hand held near a fire. No bells rang. No wolves stood. No one bowed. Sabine leaned against my shoulder and opened the report she had brought with her. "You missed a figure on page 3, she said. I stared at her. "You asked for your ring so you could criticize my accounts." "Our accounts? That is worse." She laughed. I kissed her temple. The old crown sat on my desk. The charter lay in the archive. The mark on my hand remained open at the bottom, a silver circle that refused to become a chain. For most of my life, I had believed love was proven by what a person would surrender. Sabine taught me better. Love was the hand that could close around yours and still leave the door unlocked.